Well, first tonight, I can exclusively reveal that Israel may not allow the special advisor appointed by the Albanese government to have access to its investigation into the death of Australian aid worker Zomi Frankcom. This after Foreign Minister Penny Wong has authored a letter to Israeli leadership that is so hostile it has shocked Israel and has seriously threatened the bilateral relationship between the two nations. In the letter that is signed by both Penny Wong and Deputy Prime Minister Richard Marles, they all but demanded a criminal investigation into the Israeli soldiers who mistook the aid workers' convoy for Hamas. I've obtained leaked details of the letter, and in it, Wong and Marles write, and I quote, "We acknowledge that the findings of the investigation have been transferred to the Military Advocate General, Major General Tomer Yerushalmi, in order for her to determine whether to open a criminal investigation. Appropriate action should be taken against those IDF personnel who have not acted in accordance with the law." Penny Wong and Richard Marles also took exception to Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, saying that unfortunately that accidental deaths sometimes happen in war. They wrote, "We are also alarmed by initial comments that this was an accident and that such incidents happen in a war. These responses suggest the gravity of the death of 7 humanitarian workers, and the need for concrete action in response is yet to be appreciated by the Israeli government." So claiming there that Israel doesn't understand the gravity of the situation because Netanyahu said, as a matter of fact, that sometimes accidents tragically happen in war. And Penny Wong and Richard Marles all but urging Israel to hold a criminal investigation into the accidental deaths of Zomi Frankcom and her colleagues. Well, this outrage from Penny Wong is despite Australia and its allies causing civilian casualties in every single war that our fine soldiers have been involved in. There was the US drone strike that killed an aid worker and 9 others in Kabul. There were entire weddings accidentally hit by the United States in Afghanistan. It is just a matter of fact that civilian casualties do happen in every war, and they've mostly been far greater than what we're seeing right now unfold in Gaza. It's precisely why sensible nations, including Israel, do everything possible to avoid war. But let's not forget that Israel was forced to declare a state of war exactly 6 months ago when Hamas invaded and slaughtered civilians in a manner so barbaric that Israel was left with no option. And less than a week after Zomi Frankcom's tragic death, Israel has already suspended 2 soldiers, less than a week after. But Penny Wong isn't satisfied. And you have to ask, what's her own government's record? How do they compare? Well, as Andrew Bolt noted, Australian Special Forces have been accused of deliberately killing 39 Afghan prisoners. Not one conviction. The Brereton report and the Office of the Special Investigator took years to reach its findings. It found there was credible information of, again, not accidental deaths, but war crimes committed by the ADF between 2005 and 2016. Yet we're now in 2024 and there hasn't been a single conviction and not a single criminal charge yet. The Chief of the Defence Force, Angus Campbell, received the Brereton report in November 2020. So 3.5 years after the Brereton report was handed to the ADF, not a single charge or conviction. And yet Penny Wong and Richard Marles, by the way, basically demanding Israel take stronger action than it has already, less than a week after an accidental death for which Israel has already apologised and suspended those responsible. Well, I spoke on Thursday night about the very different reaction that we've seen from the Albanese government to the deaths of 2 Australians. Galit Carbone, who was deliberately killed by Hamas on October 7, and Zomi Frankcom, who was accidentally killed by an Israeli airstrike. Well, where was the special envoy for Galit Carbone? Where was the special envoy to try and investigate her death? And by the way, her brother's going to be on my show tonight live. Why isn't Penny Wong and Anthony Albanese demanding that Hamas release the 134 hostages? Why aren't they demanding this every single day? Why aren't they demanding accountability from Hamas? Why aren't they holding press conferences, putting pressure on the Qatar leadership that's providing protection for the Hamas billionaire leaders? Instead, here's Anthony Albanese today saying he was not satisfied with Israel's initial investigation and that he's appointed Air Chief Marshal Binskin to be a special advisor on Israel's response to the accidental airstrike.
We have made it very clear that these deaths are utterly inexcusable, and the action is needed to ensure that such a tragedy is never repeated. And we also want full accountability for these deaths.
And so tonight I've reported that Israel is yet to decide whether to allow Binskin access to their investigation. There's a view that no matter what Israel's initial investigation would have found, or no matter what they would have done, Penny Wong always intended to send such a harsh letter that chastises the Israeli government for its conduct in Gaza. Rather than wait for Israel to respond to the letter that they said they intended to appoint a special advisor, Penny Wong made it public on the weekend that a decision had been made, and today Binskin's name released. As a direct result of Penny Wong's handling of this situation, the bilateral relationship between Israel and Australia has deteriorated to its lowest point under the Albanese government. The Australian's Ben Packham reports today that ANU International Professor Don Rothwell says appointing a special advisor to review the actions of a friendly foreign country's military is unprecedented. But the truth is, Albanese and Penny Wong struggled to even show their support for Israel when the terror attacks first took place 6 months ago. Many of us remember where we were when we first heard about those terrorist onslaught on Israel on October 7. Netanyahu declared a state of war around 6:30 p.m. our time, and we watched in horror as young girls were forced into pickup trucks by Hamas terrorists, and entire families, babies included, were burned and slaughtered. And then in the days that followed, we watched in confusion. Why didn't Albanese immediately visit a synagogue? Why did he take so long to respond? And why didn't Penny Wong condemn unequivocally those attacks instead of calling for restraint while the attacks were still happening and before any thought of action from Israel had even begun? Ever since then, Albanese's tone and, of course, Penny Wong's have been severely lacking. The Prime Minister said he wouldn't let anti-Semitism take a foothold in Australia, but by the time he said that, it had already exploded. And they were hollow words in any case. He's done nothing to stop the rise in anti-Semitism. On the contrary, the fact he's over-egging, he's exaggerating his verbal attack on Israel is actually contributing to the rise of anti-Semitism. It's irresponsible. Sometimes it's difficult to put into words how betrayed you feel by a government. My former editor, Christopher Dorr, has just written a piece over on The Nightly, which seems to encapsulate this sentiment better than I ever could, even though he's not Jewish. And so I'm going to end this report tonight with his words. He writes that Albanese has had assurances directly from his Israeli counterpart, but wants to stay angry. He wants answers and a transparent investigation, yet preempts the findings by declaring the drone strike a war crime, a breach of humanitarian international law. With disdain and deliberate visceral disgust, Wong, from the comfort and safety of her office in the Adelaide CBD, spits out orders to Israel in the grip of yet another lonely existential war they didn't ask for. He writes, today in rhetoric and action, this Albanese Labor government has abandoned Israel, left it alone and isolated in the ongoing war against radical Islamist leaders and their terrorists, determined to destroy Western civilization. In doing so, Albanese and Wong have deserted Jews, the people of Israel, yes, and let's be clear on this, the torn and tormented Jewish families in Australia as well. Albanese has left Australian Jews forlorn, confused and bereft. He has failed to find the moral strength and the measured words required to guide the nation through this crisis. He has shown no sign he comprehends for a moment the impact he is having as Prime Minister on Jewish Australia. Right now, Albanese and Wong are saying loudly, disturbingly, Israel, we are not your friend. We are not in this with you. This casual indifference, the arrogance, is echoing through the homes of Jewish families. It is deplorable. They need to stop and reset urgently.